Alev, can you see things on your phone? Like, will you be able to see
Yes,
the slides when I advance them? Okay.
I think so. I can see whoever's speaking right now. So,
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Great. Phoenix, would you like me to go ahead and share the screen, or do you have any sort of front?
Yeah, I'll introduce you. So,
Okay.
okay, so uh, Jessica Ludy is a risk program manager and senior planner for the San Francisco District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In this role, Jessica works with various community and government partners to identify and solve water resource problems. She is relatively new to the federal government, but worked for 12 years with Bay Area and California communities on flood safety, climate change, and ecosystem restoration projects. Jessica is a co-chair of the Task Force on Social Justice and Flood Risk Management, and she specialized in flood risk communication. She lives in North Oakland and moved to the Bay Area in 2007. Alev Bilginsoy is a water resource planner with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers San Francisco District. Previously, she worked on water quality monitoring and community-based planning along the San Lorenzo River in Santa Cruz. Alev completed her master's at UC Berkeley. Thank you for joining us today.
We are very happy to be here. Thank you.
thanks for having us.
Okay, let me make sure I do the right one. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Can you see my slide that says working on shoreline risk together? Or
you're not sharing.
Do you see the one with all the notes? Sorry?
You're not sharing.
Oh, let me try again. Okay. 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 Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there and the last discussion of the day. And thanks, Phoenix, and to the whole organization team for having us. We are excited to be here and talk to you a bit about ways that our agency may be able to support you all and the city of Oakland in addressing shoreline, flood risk, and sea level rise challenges in the future. So as Phoenix mentioned, my name is Jessica Ludy. I grew up in Northern Michigan and I've lived in the Bay Area since 2007. Our San Francisco district office is over in San Francisco near the Civic Center in the federal building, but I'm talking to you from my basement in Oakland. I came to the field of flood risk management because of what happened during Hurricane Katrina, where it was not only sort of the mass levee failures and system failures, but also the enormous inequality in terms of the hurricane response and recovery and the consequences. And I was sort of moved at that moment to get into this profession and to get into the federal government to try to make a difference at the policy level. And my phone number is there. You can feel free to call me anytime. Alev? I think you're muted.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alev. I'm a planner with the Army Corps. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, but moved to California in 2015. I wrote here that I'm motivated by Jessica Ludy, and it's true. But more generally speaking, I'm very motivated by collaborative work and teamwork. And so I feel really excited to be supporting Jessica on some of our flood risk management programs and projects because we get to work with community partners, community members, community leaders, and drive forward super collaborative work. And I've got my cell phone there. So if you want to reach out about any project ideas or anything we share today, feel free to shoot a text or give me a call.
Thanks, Alev. So for today's objectives, we want to introduce you to us at the Army Corps. We also want to learn from you. I think someone has a live mic. Oh, great. And sort of hear your priorities and concerns along the Oakland shoreline. And then finally, we want to identify some potential opportunities for us to be able to support the city of Oakland in addressing your shoreline priorities. And so first, I'll discuss real quickly our mission and work. Who are we and what do we do? Alev will talk briefly about our technical assistance programs, which relates to how we, a mechanism by which we can serve and support you all in shoreline adaptation. Then we'll do a kind of short activity in possibly breakout groups if that works, to kick off brainstorming ways that we might be able to plan a project together, and then we'll kind of share out and talk about next steps. So to step through briefly a glossary of terms, you will see or hear USACE or USACE. It's just our acronym for the Army Corps of Engineers. Sometimes you'll also hear us say the Corps, but we'll try and stick with one acronym rather than changing them around. You'll hear us say the San Francisco District, which is our district. It's a geographic subgroup from the national organization. You'll hear us talk about partners, which refers to specifically city, state, and federal agencies. Because we take direction from Congress using federal tax dollars, we are requested or required to work specifically for government partners as opposed to specifically for an individual or an organization or a company or something like that. You will also hear technical assistance, which Alev will explain shortly, and it's a way that we can provide expertise and planning support to our partners, often free of charge. You'll hear us discuss interagency project, which will be the focus of our discussion today because it's what we see as the biggest opportunity to work together. And it refers to some sort of project or study where we work with other partners to achieve a common goal. And those partners are, again, local, state, and other federal agencies. And then finally, you'll hear us talk about flood risk management. And what we mean by that is this is the practice of generally understanding where and when floods can occur. And this includes things like sea level rise and stormwater and rain. We work on then understanding how flooding can cause harm to our communities, our environment, our assets, and ways of life. And then also identifying actions that people or organizations and institutions can take before, during, and after floods to reduce that harm. So this all fits under the umbrella of flood risk management. And yeah.
There's a question in the chat that says, for clarification, is Oakland included in the San Francisco district region? And the answer is yes. Oakland is within San Francisco district.
Yeah, we'll show you a map in a moment. And thanks, Alev, because I can't actually see the chat, so I appreciate that. So in your handouts, you should have a copy of the slides and the glossary. We also prepared a couple-page handout on how to create a project proposal because we'll step through the process today, but we didn't want to belabor it, and it's a reference so that you can go back to it later on if your group decides that you want to move forward. We also have a blank proposal application and partner support forms in there so you can see what we're talking about, and then our contact information is embedded in this presentation.
There's a question in the chat about where the handouts are located, and I'm not exactly sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we sent them to Phoenix, so I'm not sure when. But we can work with Phoenix afterwards to get them to you.
Yeah, I can link them in the chat and I can send them out afterwards as well.
Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you. So who are we? What do we do? Just given kind of a brief overview of our mission areas and the different ways in which we can support communities. First is our flood risk management mission, which we'll be talking mostly about today. In addition, we have navigation, where in the late 1700s, our first mission as an agency was to optimize shipping throughout the nation by dredging shipping channels to ensure that travel and commerce were maintained. As a local example of this, we're currently working with the Port of Oakland to help determine how deep the channel and turning basin must be in order for very large ships to be able to come into port at Oakland and turn around. And then eventually, if the analysis recommends such a project, then the Army Corps would lead the construction of it. Moving on to ecosystem restoration, in the 1970s, which was kind of the same time that the federal government passed a lot of environmental laws, Congress also gave the Army Corps an ecosystem restoration mission. And this was in part to sort of help repair some of the drastic environmental damage that was starting to be seen across the nation and specifically in our waterways. And then in the Bay Area especially, we also have a very strong expertise of, quote, engineering with nature, which is basically what our agency calls green infrastructure or nature-based adaptation. It's the concept of using nature to help solve some of these difficult problems rather than, for example, just using concrete and sending the water away. And I believe you may have already had a class a little bit on this today. So that's something that we specialize in. And then kind of the 4 bullets on the bottom, water supply, water quality, emergency response, and cultural resource protection. These are the primary mission areas of other agencies, but we also have the ability to sort of support these missions. There's just not our primary mission. Where do we work and what do we do? Whoops, I did the animation wrong. So first, take a look at the map on the right. This is California, and in California, the Army Corps has 3 districts. In blue or purple, whatever that color is on the left, is the San Francisco district, which you can see runs from the top of the state down along the coastal watersheds, including the Bay Area, all the way down past Monterey and ending somewhere around San Luis Obispo. The green area is our Sacramento district, which includes a lot of the Central Valley. It also includes all of Nevada and parts of Western Colorado. And then the pink area at the bottom of the map is our Los Angeles district. So at the Corps, we partner with communities, tribes, and state agencies to help understand, communicate, and manage flood risk, including sea level rise. And this means that we look at actions all throughout the flood risk management cycle, which is what this picture is supposed to represent. So we look at taking actions before a flood, during a flood, and after a flood to overall reduce the negative impacts. For example, right now we're working with the Port of San Francisco to evaluate the long-term impacts of flooding and sea level rise along the waterfront, and looking for the best option to reduce that risk over time. And then eventually the idea is that we would construct it if it's approved by Congress. Similarly, we are building a nature-based solution or an engineering with nature solution down in the South Bay near Alviso called a horizontal levee. So often this type of work takes the form of like multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects, and it often results in the construction of large infrastructure. And it also requires that the city or whomever the local partner is pay for 50% of the study cost to do the analysis, as well as 50% of the construction costs. And I hinted at this earlier, but as a federal agency, we can really only do this work when Congress tells us to do it. And the way that Congress tells us to do it is when, like, the communities and the constituents, the people that are represented by Congress, when they submit like a letter of request and they asked Congress to tell us to do the work, if that makes sense. But we do have other ways of supporting communities through technical assistance. It doesn't require a congressional request. And this is what Alev will discuss. Okay.
Yeah, so moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about the Silver Jackets program specifically. We have a few different tools and authorities within the San Francisco district to provide technical assistance to local communities who want to address different types of flood risk or flood-related risk. But the Silver Jackets program is a highly collaborative one, and one that we are, really in favor of for a few reasons that we'll walk through. So Silver Jackets brings together teams from different government organizations at different levels. That's anywhere from city and county agencies to state and regional agencies to federal agencies. And there's some logos on the right to demonstrate the type of agencies that we get to work with. Silver Jackets program allows us to create these interagency projects, which basically mean we work with community-based organizations and a range of agencies to create non-structural projects. So the best way to describe non-structural is to talk about what structural projects mean. This is the type of infrastructure that Jessica mentioned earlier, like the construction of a wetland or the dredging of a channel or construction of a flood wall. These projects don't do that type of work. Rather, they focus on developing plans, toolkits, guides, and public engagement events and workshops that begin to address flood risk along shorelines, along rivers, and in urban areas. Interagency projects are defined by community priorities and community needs. And yeah, I think we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So some examples of interagency projects that we get to work on. First one is floodplain mapping and hazard assessment. The goal of this is quite simple. It's just to understand where flooding might occur within the community currently or in the future. So we look at flooding from a range of different sources. This could be coastal in the form of sea level rise or waves during a storm event. This could be stormwater flooding if there's really heavy rain in certain areas and the stormwater system gets backed up. That floods the street and creates different types of problems in terms of transportation and access. It could also be riverine flooding that comes from high precipitation events as well. So basically, floodplain mapping helps us understand where the risks are or where they might be and prioritize the areas that kind of need the most urgent response and planning. The next example is a suite of education and outreach offerings. So we can host outreach events, we can hold training events, and we can host workshops with the public or with different agencies, all with the goal of increasing awareness and knowledge and coordination around flood preparedness or emergency response or planning for future larger projects. The next slide, please. The final example that we'll talk about in depth is the different types of planning work that we can do. So we can create emergency action plans with local communities. We can look at existing plans like the City of Oakland's hazard mitigation plan and identify items that have been recommended in that plan, like let's say floodplain mapping, for example, and focus on producing floodplain maps that are relevant and useful to the community. We submitted a proposal last year with Marin City. Marin City identified this current flood issue, which is that when it rains and when there's high tide, the main access road in and out of their community is flooded. And they realize that this currently poses problems, but could also be an increasing risk. And they wanted to develop an emergency action plan, which determines basically what will be done when there is flooding that occurs, how to recover from that flooding, how to manage resources to ensure that the community is the safest and the most resilient that they can be in the face of that flood risk. Next slide. Here are some other examples really quickly of the types of projects that we can do. And we can inventory flood-prone buildings or community assets like schools, churches, community centers. also different types of infrastructure like water and power. We can put together risk communication materials if there is a need for better understanding flood risk within a community. We can develop those and print them. Next. So we're going to quickly go over how the project proposal development and project implementation works. This is described in much more detail in the handouts. So the first step is to identify the project need. We look to local community members and community leaders to identify that need, as they are experts in their community and their flood risk. The next step is to work collaboratively with those community leaders to develop a project scope, which is basically like the activities that we're going to do, as well as like the final product that the project will produce, and a proposal. Then we submit an application. So the upcoming application deadline is March 2022. So working back from that, we are actively looking to identify project needs and develop project scopes with communities within our district at this moment. So once we submit the application, we wait for a little bit, we wait some more, and then we hopefully hear back from headquarters, who kind of decides which projects are going to be funded. And we hear that our project has been, it will be funded around August. And then that gives us a year to 18 months to complete a project. So in terms of how the collaboration breaks down, we're going to talk about two main partners, but there are more, and the handouts that we have shared with y'all have more detail on that. So we're going to talk about you all, which are the local community partners and community members, and then us as the San Francisco district. So the first step in this process is determining your primary flood risk concerns and project needs. Then the San Francisco district will work with y'all to identify a project idea that could work for technical assistance. We both work on bringing more partners to the table. As we mentioned, these interagency projects are super collaborative. So we want to bring in local partners as well as partners on the state and federal level that can support the project that we're looking to implement. And support in this context means providing in-kind labor. So that is basically a way that we can leverage current and future resources to financially back a project. The local partners produce a project letter of support, which basically says, we're really excited about this project. This is how this project supports our needs. And then the San Francisco district will write the project proposal and the application with guidance from local partners, and we'll include those letters of support when we submit them in March. So once we hear back that we have funding, the local partners will guide the project implementation, participate in meetings, review any draft documents, and the San Francisco district will complete that project within 12 to 18 months. So the way that this breaks down in terms of the kind of labor and financial inputs is that the San Francisco district can provide between $80,000 and $120,000 worth of labor. This is free to local partners and to community members. We do look for local partners. These are usually city and county agencies that can match the San Francisco district's input in terms of labor and time. So no money is exchanged here. This is not a grant program, which means that the money doesn't come from the federal government directly to the local partners, but rather we're all kind of piecing together existing resources and new resources to produce the project that we think will effectively reduce flood risk. So briefly, what we love about interagency projects is that they're super collaborative and they're community oriented. We're doing some fun matchmaking, which is we're looking to local expertise and local priorities and finding the best ways that the Army Corps and the San Francisco District can support them with the tools and the resources and the expertise that we have within our team. These projects are typically much faster than other core projects. As we said, they're completed between 12 and 18 months from when we hear back that we have funding. And we are excited about them because they springboard future projects. For example, one project, a Silver Jackets project, could be an emergency action plan, which determines recommended next steps for increasing or improving a community's recovery after a flood. Those next steps could actually later become projects that are implemented or built through collaboration with the Army Corps or other federal agencies. Another thing that we love about the interagency projects is they really elevate local concerns up to state, regional, and federal partners. So it brings more awareness along that kind of group of, or among that group of organizations to what is being experienced on the ground in San Francisco District.
So with that, we know that was a lot of information and not a lot of time. We wanted to take a few minutes for questions, and then we can move to the group activity, which is 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll stop sharing at the moment. Let's see. Oops. Well, actually, no, I won't. But now I can hopefully see the chat if there are any questions.
There's a question about whether the slides will be shared, and they should be included within the Drive link that Phoenix dropped in the chat, and we can make sure that we also email those to you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll provide just a couple more examples of interagency projects that I've worked on. Oh, hey, look at that. What are some examples of flood risk projects that happen in residential areas near the shoreline? So if you mean the interagency projects that we were just talking about, some examples of those are, so I was working on a project in a small town in Colorado where in the late 80s, there was a very high water event on the river, and the local authorities piled up a bunch of rubble to sort of create this berm and prevent the river from flooding the community, which is a low-income community, primarily non-English speaking. But then they just sort of left it there 30 years ago, and people have been kind of relying on it as a permanent structure, even though it was never meant to be one. And so what we did, for as an example for this project, and it is a residential area right next to the river, is we completed a bit of a flood risk analysis. So we sort of took a lot of data about water and how it works on the Colorado River to take a look and simulate some scenarios in which the water might rise high enough and break through that structure, that berm, that pile of rocks, and where the water would go. And then we use that information to create this emergency action plan that the city and community can use to respond or prepare if such an emergency ever presents itself. And then like the springboard next project that's coming out of that is the community or the city is going to take the emergency action plan and work with us, and we're going to do outreach with the community to talk about things like evacuation. That's one example of an interagency project along the shoreline, and we worked with the U.S. Geological Survey. Let's see, and I can provide more examples if there are questions. I'm interested in learning more about how groundwater flooding may impact residential areas nearest to the shoreline. So I don't have that answer for you, but that could be a potential project where we could partner with the USGS and the Army Corps folks and City of Oakland, and we could sort of identify like, all right, where are the specific residential areas that we're talking about, and then we would pull together our interagency team to try to understand, based on what we know now and based on what the data are saying about the future, we can try to assess how groundwater will affect that area. And, you know, will the groundwater itself cause flooding, or is it simply that as the groundwater table rises, then when we have rain events, it makes it harder for them to drain? Like, what is the situation? So yeah, we could analyze something like that through this sort of project. So if that's a need, that's a great thing to note, and maybe it's something we could talk about. And if we don't have, for example, like a groundwater expert within the San Francisco district, we could still bring in some of our staff who do in other districts that have groundwater expertise, or we could partner with USGS, who I think does a lot of work around groundwater flooding. But anyway, yeah. So let's see. You mentioned before needing matching funds for this program. Where do those matching funds generally come from? So I guess to clarify, we need a matching contribution in time and labor, but we don't actually need the money. So for example, and I'm just gonna ballpark a number. Let's say that we decide that we're gonna go ahead and do this groundwater analysis to see how groundwater flooding might affect residential areas. And we say that, all right, the Army Corps is going to contribute $50,000 worth of labor on this project. What we would just need in terms of matching is we would need to have like the City of Oakland and maybe whatever other partners, let's say USGS would join, maybe FEMA has some sort of consideration, or BCDC some role to play. Maybe FEMA says, okay, we'll contribute roughly $20,000 worth of our time. And the City of Oakland says, okay, we'll contribute roughly $20,000 worth of our time. And we also have all these studies that we've already done, and we can give you some existing information. And then now all of a sudden, we only need to find one more partner who's willing to give $10,000 worth of time. And I know I say only, but I guess in terms of like cities' budgets, it seems like it's been, at least our experience so far, has been fairly easy to find partners willing to give $10,000 worth of time. Or for example, so in terms of where it comes from, it is coming from the counties or the various partners. And if a partner is not able to contribute time, then they just wouldn't join the project, if that makes sense. So I heard someone say something about free community work. Please say something more about this. I don't know whether you're asking if we're asking the community to work for free, or if you mean we're giving work to the community for free, but I'll speak to both. It is about, for the latter, the Army Corps can do technical work for free, okay, for the community. And in terms of asking the community to work for free, so as Alev mentioned, we don't have the ability through this program to give funding to anyone else. And so the way I've seen it work, it's like everybody brings kind of their part to the table. And where I've seen this play out for the community to actually get paid to participate is there is often some sort of nonprofit or other grant source involved that pays for the time of that community. So for example, I think similar to how I think there may be a grant that's funding some of this work for the 18 students that are in your academy right now, you know, maybe that organization could fund a community to be involved in this project. There's also an organization called the Anthropocene Alliance, and one of the things that they do is bring money to community and environmental justice leaders in order for them to like work on projects. So like the Army Corps doesn't have the ability to give that money to the community, but like if between the Army Corps' relationships and the community's relationships and others, we could connect with a grant giving organization and see if they'd be willing to do that. So that's how that would work. And I will say that just in general, the federal government is not yet very good at working with communities and understanding and respecting the fact that community members need to be paid to share their knowledge and to give their time and their guidance. But I would say that's something that we're working on. And there are advocacy organizations that are trying to get policy change in Congress that says things like, hey, Congress, you need to have the Army Corps give communities money to work with the Army Corps on those projects. So we don't have the authority to do that yet, but it is something that some folks are aware of and working toward. That was a really long answer. But let's see. Types of things that the Army, community things that the Army Corps can do. So in addition to kind of the technical type examples that Alev gave, we also do outreach activities. So for example, we were working in Grand Junction, Colorado, who was really trying to raise flood risk among community members. And so we provided them, we designed and printed and sent them lots of door hangers in 2 languages. The community was primarily Spanish speaking, so that they could put those educational materials on the doorsteps of people. I mean, COVID, the pandemic got in the way, but we were initially planning on going with them, with the local agency, to their farmers markets and setting up a booth to educate the community about flood risk. We've hosted emergency response workshops with tribes to sort of get all the people in the room who need to be in the room to talk through a potential emergency situation, so folks could start to know, like, oh, who are the people I would call in the emergency and where are these resources? And so those are just some examples of what we've done. In the presentation on this slide, and so again, it's in your notes, is here. Oops. This link goes to a database of like hundreds of projects of this type, these community type projects that we've done across the country and territories in Puerto Rico. So you can go there for more ideas, but also just in general, if the folks at the Academy decide that this is something you want to pursue, we can work through Phoenix to talk about next steps and when we could talk with folks. If an agency opts not to join the project, can the project still be carried out based on the jurisdiction? I think I understand what you're asking. So yeah, I mean, basically we just need enough partners who can match the level of effort that the Army Corps would put in. Like if the Army Corps is able to put in $50,000 worth of time and we could only get other agencies to come up with $40,000 worth of time, it wouldn't score well against all the other projects across the nation because the other projects would find the matches. So it's more just like we need to be able to show that it's a match. And the reason that this program wants to get the match in terms of labor is because they want to be sure that the Army Corps of Engineers isn't working in a vacuum and that there are other agencies and entities that have a vested interest in the project and seeing it succeed. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why. Could we raise $50,000 for the OSLA participations to work with you and use that as a match? Absolutely. Yep. Other things that you could do too is you could say, like, I don't know, let's say I'm going to go back to the groundwater example because it's sort of easy. Let's say that the city of Oakland has already done some preliminary analysis related to groundwater, and we end up using that analysis to help do the rest of the project. if that analysis cost the city of Oakland $50,000, then we can count that toward the match, even though the work has already been done. So we can be creative. Let's see, do we have a fund development department? I'm not sure I know what you mean by that question. But I'm wondering if it makes raising funds. So you mean like, do we have the ability to help other communities raise funds? Because our money comes from Congress. Basically, like Congress decides every year how much money the Army Corps is going to get for any number of programs. And then usually it's like, I want to say it's around June or July of every year, we find out how much money Congress has allocated to us for the next year. So when you hear things in the news about like Congress determining a budget for the new administration and stuff, like that directly relates to what we're allowed to do. So if they say next year that the interagency project has $0, then like we don't do anything next year. That's not the case. And in fact, Congress sees the value in these projects, so they've been increasing the allocations, which is great. But like we personally don't have the ability to raise money. The agency is called I'll write it in the chat. I'm not great at talking and writing at the same time. Anthropocene Alliance. And the one specifically related to flooding is called Higher Ground. And I have a great relationship with the woman who runs that. So if after you take a look at their website, if you're interested in learning more or connecting with them, I would be happy to put you in touch with Harriet. She's wonderful. So yeah, I wonder if it makes sense to do at least one of the breakout activities just so that we can get thinking about a potential project opportunity with this group. Let's see, would a project researching sewer alternatives be in the scope of the Army Corps? Possibly. What do you mean by sewer alternatives? Do you mean things like, could we use green infrastructure and bioswales to convey stormwater flows instead of a sewer system? Is that what you mean, Adam? Or let me just say, if that's what you mean, yes. If that's not what, composting toilets, process central places. Probably not composting toilets. And the reason I say that is whatever we do under this program has to have a nexus with flooding or flood risk management in some way. There has to be a flood element to it.
Jessica, there's another question in the chat here. It says, can the monetary shortfall be made up in community volunteerism that is free labor?
Yes. Yep. Oh, and then the other thing I'll mention actually about that matching is, unlike grants where I think the people who administer the grants, they usually kind of follow up and they want to report and they sort of do their accounting and check on, you know, did this partner end up contributing what they said they were going to do? There is not actually any, well, this is being recorded, I probably shouldn't say this, but like there's not actually any accounting after these projects begin. So like, let's say that, you know, a number of folks agreed that they were all, you know, partner A was going to do this, partner B was going to do this, partner C was going to do this. If something happens and all of a sudden partner A wasn't able to participate, there's like, we don't get in trouble for that because the agency understands that things happen. So there is a little bit of flexibility there as well. So what I would love to do, if there are no more super, yeah, definitely, super pressing questions, is do a little bit of the first step for this. And initially we were thinking of doing breakout groups, but maybe it just makes sense. I mean, I'll leave it up to you all to have folks write some things in the chat. What we wanted to do, as Alev had mentioned, is, you know, the first step in any project is identifying what the need is. And so that's where like the government partner and the community members say like, hey, we have this need, maybe it's what was mentioned earlier, like I'm really interested in, I know that groundwater flooding is a concern for me. I want to learn more about that. That's one example. But just taking a look at that and brainstorming some of those right now, because then these can give us ideas, and maybe throughout the rest of your course over the next couple of months, you start to come up with other ideas, and then we can figure out an opportunity to work together. So if you all are up for it, I would love to have you write in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and just say things out loud of thinking about like what flooding and shoreline concerns do we need to address? And if you don't know the answer to that right away, that's okay. But how about this? Have you ever seen or heard about flooding in Oakland? And if yes, like, do you know where it occurred? Do you know what happened? Do you know what the impacts were? Do you know anybody who experienced it? How did it affect the community? These are like the first types of questions that we use to get us going in this type of project. So like this photo is, I can't remember, what was this, 2017 maybe, where we had a really wet, rainy year. This is the Nimitz Freeway. And right, so if any of you were around for that, which I'm guessing many of you were, you probably saw or heard about this type of flooding. So anyway, I would love folks to put in the chat types of things that they would be concerned about with flooding in Oakland. And to answer your question about testing water contamination, I don't think we do. I think that's under the, like the Environmental Protection Agency's authority, but I could find out. Like, we can't do only a water quality study, but we might be able to test water contamination as part of a flood risk study. So let me get back to you on that.
I think Adam's example might be a good
yes,
example of like the nexus that we're looking for between flooding and flooding related concerns. So we might not be able to directly do water sampling and testing, but if it's related to flooding in the way that Adam is describing, then that is something we could do.
Yeah.
And then another thing.
Go ahead. I was speaking with Nahal over at BCDC last week or the week before, and she mentioned that there is sort of an increasing group, or maybe there's some increasing attention to contaminated soils around the bay and the mobilization of those pollutants when they're flooded. And so it sounds like I was planning on connecting with her later on to learn a little bit more about that and see who's involved with that. So it sounds like you're on the same page with that. But go ahead, Alev. Sorry to cut you off.
No worries. I was going to add that for challenges, not knowing your flood risk in your community is also a challenge and a flood risk in and of itself. So we want to like acknowledge the value of doing those floodplain maps or exploring flood risk in the near to long-term future in areas that we haven't studied before.
Land loss due to flooding. Yeah, and how do we address something like this? Very good question. This reminds me, actually, maybe I'll try it. Related to this question that, or this comment that Shai made, that reminded me that we're putting together a panel discussion to discuss not specifically land loss, but to discuss issues of relocation and equity concerns associated with that, especially in the face of climate change. And that's probably not going to be until like January or February, but at our district, Alev and I are actually launching in 2 weeks, a year-long webinar series, in case you want to go to more webinars on the intersection of social equity and flood risk management. Because there's been a lot of inequitable practices in the past, in addition to, who we see bearing the brunt of the impacts, and we're trying to really raise the attention to this issue in the practice. So I can forward that information to Phoenix, and then if Phoenix wants, they can forward to your group in case folks want to participate. It's a free webinar. But anyway, sorry, back to the exercise. Yes, how do you raise awareness when it's not raining? Great Highway in San Francisco, Devil's Slide in Pacifica. So it looks like highway disruptions.
Yeah, Hannah made a point here that it's important to expose youth to this field of study through youth development programs. And then Olugbemiga, I hope I pronounced that properly, said, will there be adequate drainage during a flooding?
Okay, great. I think I missed one earlier up. It was a bit of a longer chat. Where did it go?
Oh yeah,
here it is.
Okay. Was on youth engagement.
Oh, is that it? Although flood risk is an immediate need in some states, the Bay needs to prepare one way. Oh, youth. Yes, got it.
Shirley said how it'll affect people who are homeless and where they'll be able to go when camps and shelters are flooded. So one of our, we submitted a interagency project last year to work with some other state agencies that include, you know, water resource agencies and
social services,
social services agencies to have these kind of interdisciplinary conversations around how to support people who are experiencing homelessness and are living in areas that are flood prone, while also, you know, maintaining some of the flood risk management infrastructure that exists. So we are looking forward to potentially working on that and would be excited to share the results of that in the future.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good list of challenges to start with. The effects of flooding on public transportation. Yep, good call. I wonder if it would be helpful if we take 5 minutes to kind of have these last two. So one of these I want to move on to is, and you know, of course, you can continue to send us more ideas and challenges, but we wanted to say, you know, like what resources will we need to take action? And you know, some of the obvious ones are like somebody's going to need to have money to deal with this, but others that are less obvious or maybe not so obvious to a lot of the people who are doing a lot of the projects or building a lot of the projects is, you know, what local resources do we know for sure we're going to need? So I'm guessing for sure local knowledge and expertise and, you know, support there. So like who are these groups that if we were to be doing a project in Oakland that we know for sure need to be engaged? And so, you know, if there's some specifically, go ahead and put them in the chat. You know, if you're like, well, nothing gets done here without the support of fill in the blank. I know there's a lot of community-based organizations in Oakland. I know there's a lot of mutual aid groups. There's a lot of folks who do a ton of work. And so I imagine they would be essential to making some of this happen. Then if you know that there's certain, what do I want to say, folks who have political power, and would they need to be at the table? Are there folks who, you know, have, you know, if something is a physical change in the landscape, we know that that we would need to get the land use authority involved too. But anyway, so just trying to say, like, what are the types of, you know, human, political, funding, technical, scientific, what are the resources that we would eventually need to take action? West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to start adding this one.
Hannah shared youth uprise and
Say that again?
Hannah shared
great.
youth uprise and why EP. What does that acronym stand for? Youth Employment. Okay. And then also Maria shares City of Oakland, BART, USDOT, Caltrans. Shai said local resident support and participation. Mitsila said East Bay Regional Parks District. There's Girl Scouts.
This is awesome, everyone, by the way. These are the partners who would eventually be, you know, eventually could be joining in.
East Bay Mud, the Prescott Neighbors, Boy Scouts, Port of Oakland, the East Oakland Collective, Neighbors Together. This is great. There's a lot of responses. The Broward Dellums Institute for Sustainable Policy and Studies, Oakland Parks and Rec. We'll save the chat so that we have all of these.
Okay.
Yeah. Communities for Better Environment, OUSD. Is that the school district? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Higher Ground After School Program, SELC. Adam, would you mind sharing what the organization? Sustainable Economies Law Center. Great, thank you. Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Should we move on to the last prompt, maybe?
Peralta Colleges. Yeah, probably. Since there's 4 minutes left and it's Saturday, I think we should let everybody go. But what we were just going to have here for next steps. So first, really quickly, if any of you, either during this Leadership Academy or after you finish, are interested in learning more about jobs in the water resources industry or specifically at the Corps, please contact myself, please contact me and Alev. We have our information here, and this is in your handout information. And then also, you know, we sort of want to say, if talking about some of these project opportunities that we discussed sounds interesting to you, I know you have 6 more months of your, or maybe 5 more months of the Leadership Academy, but if any of this sounds interesting, you know, let's stay in touch, because as we mentioned, if we were to submit something together with Oakland, we would need to submit it in March. And so we would probably want to have an idea of what we would be doing maybe sometime by December and January. And then we could spend time in January and February bringing in all the right partners, deciding what we're going to, you know, what the actual project would look like. And then we sort of put that together. So, and, you know, we've got our contact information in there. We're also happy to connect with you through Phoenix and the Academy, up to you. So I'll leave that there. Alev, did you want to say anything?
I don't think so. Yeah, we can hang for the next 2 minutes, or if anyone wants to
we can
stay and ask questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yes, I was very interested. Okay, great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.